Hey everybody, I don't know about you, but as you've watched out over the world, the war in Russia and Ukraine is not just isolated to Eastern Europe. It's spread all over the world, and you can see it in market instabilities. You can see it here. People who do not think that that war is affecting you, all you got to do is look at gas prices. You look at your food prices. You see the global change that has happened. But you know something that's also affected investments as well. And I've said all along, legacy precious metals is your navigator. They're the ones that see you through to get to the next level. The good news about this is even with market volatility, market instability, you've got options. And gold prices are rising as investors turn to gold. And gold presents a hedge against this inflation and that protects you against the weakening dollar, which we are seeing. Legacy Precious Metals is the only company I trust to deal with gold and silver and the other precious metals. You need this investment. You need this as part of your portfolio to keep you buffered from what we're seeing in the world, war and volatility in the market. This is where you need to be. Call Legacy Precious Metals today. Be proactive about this. Get on board with it. Call them at 866-528-1903, 866-528-1903, or you can download their free investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com. legacypminvestments.com, your navigator in a volatile world of investments.
Do you want to listen to a podcast?
By who?
Georgia GOP Congressman Doug Collins.
How is it?
The greatest thing I have ever heard in my whole life.
I could not believe my ears.
In this house, wherever the rules are disregarded, chaos and mob rule. It has been said today, where is bravery? I'll tell you where bravery is found and courage is found. It's found in this minority who has lived through the last year of nothing but rules being broken, people being put down, questions not being answered, and this majority say, be damned with anything else. We're going to impeach and do whatever we want to do. Why? Because we won an election. I guarantee you, one day you'll be back in the minority and it ain't gonna be that fun.
Hey everybody, it's Doug Collins. Welcome back to the Doug Collins Podcast. Great day today. Good friend of mine, Sean Spicer, is with us today. Sean has a new podcast coming out, joining the world back of podcasting, and we're excited to not only highlight what Sean's going to be doing on his podcast, but we're going to have a chance just to talk a little bit of politics, a little bit of things going on in our society right now with Supreme Court, but also with the presidency, with the elections, just everything going on. It's always good to catch up with Sean. Of course, Sean is a Newsmax host, Spicer & Company. Great show. If you do not watch it, please put it on your to-do list. Now, I believe we're now at 5 o'clock on weekdays. And Newsmax, I enjoy always being on there when I can with Sean, but the show is great. You ever want to catch it on. So, Sean, welcome back to the Doug Collins Podcast.
Always good to be with you, Doug. Yeah, we're at 5 o'clock every weekday. And the thing that's interesting is the show. I love doing the show. It's been one of the greatest things in my life, just to be able to have these great conversations with folks every night. But they're limited to 5 to 7 minutes, and so you get 3 to 4 questions. And the thing that I wanted to do with this podcast, it's just twice a week, so it's not meant to. It's just it's meant to. So many times I have a guest, and I'll say, okay, so it's topical. So tonight we're having, so-and-so on, and we're going to talk about immigration. But I'm like, gosh, I really love the background of that person. And so the title of the podcast is Beyond the Briefing. And the idea is, when I was press secretary, everyone knew me from the briefing. And I was like, well, there's a lot beyond the briefing that you don't know about me. And so the idea is to get to know people beyond the briefing. So the other day I interviewed the president of Guatemala on the show. Well, everybody wants you to ask the questions that Kamala Harris won't, right? Root cause of immigration. But when you start to do some research about this guy, his political background and his upbringing are absolutely fascinating. And I'm thinking, okay, this is the kind of guy that I want to sit down with for 20 minutes. And again, that's the idea. It's just 20 minutes to go beyond the briefing, to say, tell me a little bit about who you are as a person, And I'm just an inquisitive guy. I mean, I always, whether it's, how does Doug Collins get elected to Congress? And, you and I have known each other. And,
yeah, there's a lot of people ask that question.
but I sort of, growing up in politics, I was the kid that always would sort of like love to scratch that surface and be like, tell me, how did you get here? And so whether it's business, entertainment, politics, I'm just always inquisitive about how somebody got there. And so for me, I've had the opportunity to get to know a lot of folks, especially over the last 5 or 6 years. And I thought it would be fun once or twice a week to sit down with them and just sort of say to them, tell me how you got to where you did. And and maybe go beyond what I call the briefing, which is a lot of times we think we know somebody because we see them on TV or we read their tweets, but we really don't know them. And it's funny. I mean, I even get asked all the time about, Donald Trump, and they'll say, tell me something we don't know about him, or what's he really like in person? And it's the same thing where I think people want to know the real person. And so for me, this was something I just like the long form. I like being able to have a discussion with somebody and get to know them and get to share things that maybe even, I know right before we started this conversation, you were talking to one of your folks about going to Nashville, and one of my favorite folks from Nashville is John Rich. And John Rich and I have had some fun conversations about his background, and not just his music background, but he is quite the successful business person, and how he developed his Redneck Riviera brands and the tenacity and the innovation and the entrepreneurship. And it's just like he starts telling you these stories, and you're like, you're sitting there, eyes wide open, mouth to the floor, going, oh, captivated. Anyway, so I'm like, I hear these stories from folks, and I'm like, all right, I want to capture that lightning in a bottle.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Well, one of the things I will tell you, if you get John Rich to come on the podcast, one of the things you need to go to his place to do it in Nashville. His place is amazing. It overlooks Nashville. It's a pretty cool place. And John's a great guy. But you just hit on something, and we'll just take off of this for that, because I think it highlights your podcast, it highlights my podcast, and there's a lot of room out there. Is people don't know the people that they see on TV or they see on Twitter, or they go out and they make assumptions. One of the things you talk about, Donald Trump, everybody always used to ask me, what is he like? And I said, for me, he's the same off camera as he is on camera, except maybe a little more animated off camera, but he's the same kind of person.
Yeah.
You and I know, we get that part, but but when you go to these songwriters, you mentioned John Rich, who was an entertainer, actor, everything else. But the background of so many of these folks that you see are hard work, it's tenacity, it's the things that you can't bring out in a 3 or 4 minute interview.
Yeah. But that's the thing, is that when you're in politics in particular, but even if it's not, even if it's just on TV or an entertainment of some sort, and you just are seeing somebody through a clip, and then you have a conversation with them, and you get to have an exchange with them of some sort, even maybe share a meal or something, and you get to know them. I'm always intrigued by sort of like, wow, I never knew that about you. Or to your point, like Trump, it was funny at one point, a Sunday show commentator with bad hair said that Trump never laughs. And I thought, are you kidding me? He is one of the funniest damn people I've ever met. I mean, he tells jokes, he laughs, and I mean, some of the jokes you don't want to repeat, but but I mean, it's just there are things about, and then I will tell you, I've also seen a guy like that be like so unbelievably compassionate and empathetic, and and so for me, it's like, I don't know, like I said, I just think it's fun to share with people a side of somebody that exists.
It's funny you should bring that up. I was one of the topics that I put in, and also you got your book out and everything else. Well, and mine from when I wrote about the impeachment. One of the funniest stories that I put into the book was the transcript of the phone call. And this was the whole basis that everybody's getting ginned up, and actually was the impeachment. And they called us all to the White House, and we was in the Roosevelt room, and Pat Cipollini, all the White House counsel, and they said, okay, we're going to hand you out this transcript. This is what we're going to be releasing here in a couple hours. And it was me, and it was some senators, Lindsey Graham, David Perdue, Jim Jordan, Mark. There was a lot of us in the room, about 8 or 9 of us. They handed this out, and I read it. And I read fairly quickly, and I read through it, and I said, okay, I'm not sure what the problem here is. I don't see anything. And so I said, well, maybe I'm not as smart as the other people in the room. So I read it again, and I'm waiting for everybody else to finish. About that time, and I wish I could remember who exactly it was. So I keep it out. I'm not sure who it was. They said, I'm not sure this is accurate. And the room just got quiet. And it was already quiet, and it's sort of this eerie silence. And I think it was Pat or somebody from the White House counsel's office said, why do you think it's not accurate? He said, the language is too clean. And it was like, I said, yeah. I said, well, you get it. But that's what you see on the inside that people don't always get. And I think that's what's great about your podcast, great about, diving into this kind of stuff. Because people do need to know, I think it is something that is the human side of us all, because there is a tendency, and this is, Sean, I'd love to hear your take on this. When we see you on TV all the time, there's this tendency to set you aside, a political figure, whether it be the left or the right. You're set off as special. You're set off as different. And the reality is 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate, all came from a kid's playground somewhere. I mean, they all came from families, they all came from backgrounds. They have some way that gets them there. Telling that story is important, I think, because we're getting further and further disconnected from government. Are you seeing that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing actually, it depends on the party, though. See, I do think it's important. The way I grew up, because I think the background matters. For me, at least, I think that this idea of, being able to say, like, I mean, I tell people all the time, like, the way I grew up, my parents were like, you want something, you work for it, you earn the money, and then you can buy it. It instilled a sense of value and work ethic, of appreciation for a dollar. But so having people understand that, because I think when you get to a certain place, it's weird. There's this disconnect, and it happens in politics. It happens in business to some degree if you're successful, that people assume once you achieve the success that you forgot where you came from, right? And so they're like, well, and I think reminding people that, like, hey, look, I know the value of a dollar. I know what it takes. I know what hard work is. And so I think when you're talking to folks there's a relatability that, I know what it's like to be in a particular place or circumstance, is important, because for a lot of people, they just see the sort of, if you go from point A to point B, they just see point B. And so, they just see Congressman Doug Collins elected. They didn't see what did it take to get there, the struggles, the hard work, the campaigns, the phone calls, also what happened way before that. And so, but I think the way the left is conducting themselves isn't necessarily the same, because they're doing this more on an identity basis of saying, well, regardless of your background, if you don't fit into this box, then it's different. And that's what's interesting to me, because I think, you can have a resume that has different experiences, that without context sometimes doesn't tell the whole story.
Well, the left enjoys, if you fit, and you see this, Sean, and we've seen this here recently in the Supreme Court ruling, especially with Clarence Thomas, but we've seen it with, other conservatives, if you would, female and males is alike, whether people of color, their backgrounds. It's if they don't fit what is traditionally a liberal mindset, then all of a sudden they're attacked. And for me, I've got to know Justice Thomas, but reading his book on, My Grandfather's Son, that's sort of like what, it's a book form of a podcast that gets people knowledge that you can't put stereotypical things on people just because of the way they look or maybe where they're from.
Absolutely. But also, like, there's this sense on the left, like yesterday, I mean, since the Roe decision came out, Uncle Clarence was trending on Twitter. And there's this sense that if he doesn't believe what you're supposed to believe, then he's a traitor or this or that. And it's like, his circumstances are such that, he has a set of beliefs. But that's why I think it's fascinating, because, you look at whether it's Condoleezza Rice or Clarence Thomas, and I'm fascinated by how they went through a certain degree of experiences and came out with one set of beliefs, and then another set of individuals go through a fairly similar set of circumstances and comes out and has a completely diametrical set of beliefs that, about how government should operate.
It is pretty amazing. And I think you're seeing that right now, especially with, it's amazing to me especially in some of these, backgrounds and the opinions, especially when it gets to the Supreme Court, people tend to forget. And I made this comment on a radio show yesterday that people tend to forget that the courts are not there to judge an quote equity kind of thing and to say, well, what feels good and where do we need to go? They're there to actually judge the law by the Constitution. And I think we've forgotten that.
There's two things that I thought were fascinating on Roe. Well, actually, multiple things. So I shouldn't even start to enumerate this. One is that, like, what the decision was them saying, "Hey, elected officials should be making big policy decisions, not the courts." That should be something that everybody should celebrate. Like, if you believe, if Roe has 60% support, as the left says, then great. Awesome. So it's just funny how this is being presented, in terms of what the court said or did. The left and all these folks talking about it being illegitimate. And it's like, no, the court didn't take away anything. It just said, hey, actually, the only people that give rights and whatever are legislatures and elected officials, not courts. And so I thought that the way this thing was handled, the other thing that I thought was fascinating from a media standpoint was every single show, bar none. Now, I can't watch everyone, so I'm not going to, but everyone that I saw talked about rights and privileges that had been afforded to women, the right of pregnancy. Not one person, not one guest, not one host, not one reporter talked about the rights of the unborn. Not one. And I think it was fascinating because they don't even pretend that that's an issue.
It is. Well, and the other issue is what the basic Roe decision, if you get into it deeper, and I know from your background as well as mine, you get into Roe decision. Roe actually classified life as basically having that one life is better than another life based on the part you're in that life. And that's a very scary, determination that the unborn doesn't, although being life and being human life, doesn't have the rights of others, which can be then overplayed into different areas. But you're right. The child is never spoke of. And I think that's been the problem.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing, is that what is so interesting to me about how this argument has played out is there are roughly 900,000 abortions that occurred in the United States last year. If you believe, as I do, and I believe you do, that those are lives worth, those are human lives, then it is the obligation of the government to defend them. And I think this is, again, where I think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what we're debating here and what we're arguing here. This isn't about whether a woman has the right to do something. This is about whether or not the child, which science claims it is, has the right to be protected by its government. And if not then when, right? And that's what I would ask anybody on the left. Because if you can say to me, okay, the second that it's out of the womb, it's 100%. We can all agree on that. Okay, well, maybe not Ralph Northam from Virginia. But we back up and we start to say, okay, is it viability? Is it heartbeat? Where do we go? But at a certain point, we start to go, okay, well then where is that consensus that the government must by law protect life the same way it would, any other baby? And that's what we're arguing. And yet the media and folks on the left don't want to have that discussion. And I get why they don't.
No, yeah. They definitely. Well, one of the things that comes up when you discuss the child in the womb, one of the times I've heard people say, well, they can't talk, they can't eat, they can't, they can't defend themselves, they can't do this. I said, you do realize that you're also possibly describing an 80-year-old in a nursing home as well.
Well, there's also, not just, right. And I've always argued that if you can define the end of life in a very medical way, then the opposite. So if you can define death as, and again, I'm not a doctor, but it's, the absence of a heartbeat and brain waves, then the opposite must be true, i.e. it must be life if you have those, by definition. And so that to me is a pretty fail-safe thing. But also, to take your definition a little bit further, there are plenty of individuals in that have severe mental capacity problems, or other, mental or physical deformities or handicap situation, that those are equal gifts from God, that we don't sit back and say, well, let's discard them. That's not how it works. I mean, that is absolutely abhorrent to think in that kind of terms.
As a father of a special needs child who was born with spina bifida, she's 30 years old today. She has never walked. Her first steps were pushing her little wheelchair. She's 30 years old. She's at work, even as we speak on this podcast. But her quality, some would say the quality of life issue. Well, her quality of life is pretty darn good. In the sense of that she has an attitude, she has a life, she has, that we can't, measure in those terms. One of the worst, I had a speech, and it's actually out on YouTube, that I had on the floor of the House when we were discussing this abortion back in 19, when the Democrats were trying to go at this again. But they brought up a statistic, and Sean, this was really disturbing to me. And you brought up this quality of life issue, and those is that I think it was Sweden had made this statement that they had done away with Down syndrome, that they had, in some sense, they were saying they cured Down syndrome. The interesting part about that, do you realize that how it had happened, and what they were saying is it through the prenatal testing, if the child was determined to be Downs, they were killing it.
Yeah.
This is where we get to in this kind of discussion. And I think these are the kind of discussions that podcast and talking to people, getting behind the scenes is really the stuff that, we've got to look at. I want to move to one for you, just to get your take on it, and from the where you're doing from the news side, podcast side, and everything else. This one is one knowing that your military background as well with the Navy. And recently there was a story that came out that said that 40%, basically the Army was at 40% of its recruitment quota for this year. Air Force is looking like, and I can take it from perspective, the Air Force is struggling, Navy's struggling, Marines say that they're not. They're saying it's the worst since 73, since the volunteer Army came into being. What's your sort of take on that? I'd love to get you're just that sort of behind the scenes. I know I have some ideas. I'd love to hear your ideas about that.
So I'll say this first and foremost, and you probably know this, that any ideas that I express are mine alone.
Exactly.
Not the opinions of the Department of Defense, the Department of Navy, or it's interesting. I didn't know that prior to you sharing that with me. So I will say this. It's interesting because normally during a period of economic churn, recruiting goes way up because people look at the military as a very safe place, right? It's, you get a job, you get job security, you get great benefits. It's and when it comes to war, we're out of Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, there's obviously some hot spots, but it's not like it was 10 years ago.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So I think that's a fascinating question, because there's two things that kind of pop to mind. One, is there a lack of national, like like call to service, desire to serve? And two, is there a woke element here, where people who do want to serve are saying, I don't see the services exhibiting the same strength that they did, say, 10, 15, 20, 50 years ago, in the sense that they are now not about service. They're about, all of this inclusion and equity that I see online. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I'm literally thinking off the top of my head as we go.
What is it? Well, and I didn't, it just, as a conversation, it was interesting because it just recently came out. And it said, one of the interesting points that came out in the article is that of the 17 to 24 year olds, only about 23 to 24% are even eligible for military service due to obesity, school. Army actually has dropped for this year, has dropped the GED, or high school equivalency. If they come in this year, they dropped it altogether. But one of the interesting issues, and I've talked to some folks behind the scenes, and you've covered this a lot, I know, on your show and others, but nobody is talking about also the fact that these 17 to 24 year olds, if they're not vaccinated, the Army and the military is not even talking to them. So they're cutting it. This, for those of us who, whatever feeling you had about the vaccine, especially the mandate side of it, you're now seeing a real result of this playing out in a real way.
The thing is that's interesting about that, these are all very interesting. The thing that I find fascinating, and this, I don't know how many times, for a while, it was sort of like just routine that they would stick you with something.
Exactly.
I mean, if you have a problem with vaccines, I don't think the military is the right because I mean, I think they just sort of for a while are just like pull your arm down, like we're going to stick something in there. So if you have a problem taking orders or getting stuck with things, it's that's probably not the right place. But I do think the standards are an issue because the thing that's fascinating is weaponry is weaponry. What makes a great army or a great navy or a great air force um, is its people. And why we have the best in the world is because we have the best people. And lots of people can fly an F-35 or an F-18. We have better people. We have the best trained. And so if we don't maintain that edge, then I think that's the problem. So I think it's interesting. The question you're asking is so profound, and I hope the right people give it the right thought, because it's just there are days when as somebody who's at the very tail end of their career in this aspect, I do wonder what the priorities are of how what the growth is, and I've watched some of the questioning of the senior leadership across the services in Congress, and I'm just people have to remember that the military is there for a purpose. It's to defend our nation and our principles, and that is the number one thing. And I don't think that China really cares, or Russia or North Korea about how about our inclusion and equity programs. Not that I'm just and again, I'm not just making a note that I don't think they care.
No, and I think that's something we got to look at. Well, I mean, it's just interesting, and us both of you being, both of us being sort of in that final few years of our career. I mean, I think it's something to look at on what is going to be. Yeah. Me anyway. I got a few years left.
No, I was like, wait a second, that's 3. I'm not sure I'm.
Yeah. I got 2 or 3 years left, but no, for some of us who are searching at a colonel's board or from Navy captain's board, I mean, we're looking at it right now. So, switching gears as we sort of finish up here. One, I'm fascinated. You endured a lot as the spokesman, press secretary for President Trump, especially the first one, and you sort of walked right into the complete left's ire, and I think you did a great job at it. I mean, considering there was no chance that they were going to give you a break, period. What is amazing to me, and you and I've talked about this before a little bit, though, I thought Jen Psaki was evasive, roundabout, circle back. She would always do, but she was always, I will have to say this, for what she was there for, she did a good job. Now, I didn't have to agree with her, but for what she was there for, she protected the administration. Now, I think there was some issues there. I've been getting a lot of, feedback from folks, and especially as I've interviewed and they look at the administration now. Jean-Pierre, the new press secretary, I've never seen this. Even Jen Psaki did this a little bit. She would read, she'd flip in her notebook, she'd read something. The newest press secretary, she just simply reads answers that sometimes don't even apply to the questions.
Bingo. That's the key. It's one thing to read the answer. It literally, they were like, Corinne, what did you have for lunch today? And she's just like, trees are planted across the forest. And you're like, what? It's literally like, pick a page. There is, what's fascinating about that is I agree with your assessment of Jen. And Jen came up through the press ranks. She had been at the State Department, but I mean, she knew Jedi mind tricks. She had a very complicit press corps. She'd previously been at the State Department and been on campaign. I mean, so she knew these folks, and this Corinne is a political person,
Right? And
I say this because this at least it wasn't really her. She'd worked for John Edwards, on his campaign. She had worked as deputy political director for somebody else, and then so she is more on the politics and the campaign side. Not that you can't be a campaign spokesman, which Jen had been as well. But my point is, she hadn't been on the media side, and it shows. And but remember, this goes back to something that I talk about extensively in my book, that they've never chosen folks administration wide based on whether or not they were the most qualified. It was all about checking boxes. And remember how Jen introduced her. She is the first, person of color that's gay that did. I mean, it was never about she is the most qualified. So I'm not surprised. But the thing, Doug, that continues to grate at me, whether it's her, Biden himself, the vice president, is the press corps. It doesn't matter what they say or do. They literally just go like this. They nod their head. I did a segment on my show the other day, and I played the scene from the first Star Wars where Obi-Wan Kenobi comes in. He's got the droids R2-D2 and C-3PO in the back seat, and the stormtroopers stop him. They say, "Are these these?" And he says, "These are not the droids you're looking for." And they say, "These are not the droids we're looking for." And they says, "Move along." And he goes, "Move along." I feel like that's what Biden and Kamala Harris and Karine Jean-Pierre do. They go, "These are not the questions you need to get asked." And they go, "These are not the questions we want to ask. Move along, Move along." This is the lack of interest, curiosity, journalism that is done by this press corps is frankly pathetic.
Yep. Well, it's not a service to the country, and I think that's the problem. That and we've talked about this before. I mean, you've got to have the press corps is there for a reason. They're a valuable part. I mean, and every administration has always had this. Do I really want to go out with the press corps? But they always have to deal with it because it's a matter of frankly. Confidence in the country. If you can expire, even if it's your own spin, you at least say, "Hey, something's going on here." The other thing I want to get before we get going is what is up with the cue cards for Biden? I mean, look, I get it. Okay, you've been there, we've been there, but I've never seen one. The other one that I just saw just recently actually said, "You," capital letters, all capital, boldface letters. "You walk in room, greet people. You and others sit down." I mean. Sean, I've never seen this. I mean, is it that bad? I mean, that's the only thing I can assume. I mean, what do they think he's going to do?
So think about this just from your own standpoint for a second. If somebody handed you a card, like, and honest to God, like, I mean, I think about this. Like, if somebody walked in and said, "Sean, here's the thing tonight for the show. I'm going to need you to sit in your seat, and then I'm going to need you to look." I'd look at them and be like, "What do you get?" Like it's like you would be insulted, and you look at them and go, "What?" The idea that you're the president, and you're like, "Oh, thanks a lot. I appreciate you helping me get ready." Like, it's like, can you imagine? I mean, what does the morning cue card look like? Put right pant leg on first. Then
we don't know, that doesn't exist. Jill handles that,
I mean, I worry what else we're not seeing, but I honestly think to myself, like, if this ever happened to anybody else, they would say to themselves, like, "Excuse me, that's insulting. You don't tell me to welcome people and then sit down and then, like, look at person. Say hello to person. Wait till person stops talking, then say to a person." I mean, take sip of water. Swallow water.
Ask this person question. Could you? I mean, we are, your podcast, my cast are going to be family friendly. But could you imagine if you handed that card to Donald Trump?
No. So I know what happens. So when I first started with Trump, so a lot of times you'd walk in and I'd say, "Okay, so you get a set, not a sense. You so, like, let's say NBC, they might have 5 correspondents, right? Or Washington Post. So you would send some folks to the briefing room, find out who was there so that and then you could say to the president, "Okay, Peter Alexander from NBC is here. So-and-so from the Washington Post is here." And you'd kind of get a sense. And then reporters would call you prior to a press conference or a briefing, and they'd say, "Hey, by the way, I got a question I'd love to ask about immigration today. I've got this big question about Canada," or whatever. And so you'd say to the president, "Mr. President, we've got several requests for questions today. I recommend, so and so today because, the idea is that I would want to advance. And I remember the first time, and I put this list together, and he just looks at me, and I thought he was going to tear my head off. And it's like, yeah, I think I got this.
I cannot imagine Joe Biden saying that. And really, you brought something up, and just on the serious and funny side of it is, what else do they give him cards for? I mean, it's scary. And it really begs the question on who's writing the cards and putting this out there. But it goes. All right, folks. Sean Spicer with me today on the Doug Collins podcast. He's got his own podcast is out now. Get it wherever. Sean, tell us where we can get the podcast.
Wherever you get it, you go to SeanSpicer.com, but you can also go to, Apple or wherever you get it. It's called Beyond the Briefing with Sean Spicer. Get it. It's Beyond the Briefing. And then obviously Spicer and Company's every night, 5:00 on Newsmax. But anywhere that you get your podcast, iTunes, Spotify, etc., go there, download it, subscribe, rate it, love it.
All that good. All there. Hey, folks, we've been in with Sean Spicer. Great conversation. Just we hit a lot of topics. Got his new podcast out. But I think the thing that is hit for Sean, and I appreciate him so much on his show. Go watch him on his show. Is just the honesty that we take a look at where we are as a country. We got a lot of questions, and there's questions out there that I think people need answered. That's why we're here. That's why we're here on the Doug Collins podcast. That's why Sean is going to be Beyond the Briefing and also on Spicer and Company as well. Go out. Have a great day. Look forward to seeing you again on the Doug Collins podcast. Hey, everybody, I just want to talk about sleep. You know why I want to talk about sleep? It's because I just got out from underneath my MyPillow bed sheets and my pillow that I keep under my head every night, because I like to sleep on my side. I like to sleep on my back. I like to sleep, I move at night, and MyPillow is just the best thing that goes under my head. It keeps me getting restful sleep. The sheets are amazing. It's just what you need. Everybody understands you need 7 hours of sleep. Why not sleep in some of the best products out there? And Mike and the folks at MyPillow are great folks to do this with. And you can go to mypillow.com, or you can call them at 800-564-8475. Use code word Collins, Collins. You won't want to miss this. If you have not got these Giza bed sheets, you need them. They're amazing. They're soft. They don't wear out. You need those to get that sleep against your body at night and provide that cooling, just soothing nature that lets you get the most sleep. But they're not just about bed sheets and pillows. They also have the My Slippers. Amazing. I've talked to you about it before. I don't wear slippers, but I do wear My Slippers. They're amazingly comfortable. You can wear them outside. You can wear them inside. Great products. You've got towels. You've got all kinds of stuff. Go to mypillow.com. It's spring cleaning time. It's springtime to get out there and try and buy new things. Replace some of your old stuff. You'll want to replace your towels. Get some other products for your bedroom. All at mypillow.com. Mypillow.com, or call 800-564-8475. Use the promo code Collins, Collins, when you check out. I guarantee you will be satisfied.